Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blogging Theology. And today I'm delighted to welcome back Dr. Louay Fatoohi, an author and researcher in Islamic studies and comparative religion. You are most welcome, sir. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam. Thank you very much, Paul, for inviting me back. It's always a privilege.
It's great to have you back, actually. For those who don't know, Louay is originally from Baghdad, Iraq. He reverted from Christianity to Islam in his early 20s. He has a PhD from Durham University in the UK. He has published extensively on Islamic studies and is particularly interested in comparing historical accounts in the Quran with their counterparts in Jewish, Christian, and other sources. He is also interested in comparative Abrahamic religions in general, tafsir, that's Quranic exegesis, the historical Jesus, and Sufism. Now, today, we're going to be looking at a very momentous event, a momentous question, a series of issues. What is the root cause of the ongoing Israeli war on the people of Gaza? How did this come about? And Dr. Louay locates the roots of the current situation in America's self-image as a chosen, exceptional redeemer nation, which, he argues, is borrowed from the Hebrew Bible, having been modeled on the history of the Israelites. American exceptionalism has been the main driving force behind the creation of Israel in Palestine. America sees Israel as a confirmation of its own self-identity. It's a really important point that you make, I think. Dr. Louay argues that American exceptionalism is not only a supremacist ideology, but the most dangerous ideology in the world. So incredibly strong words there and a fascinating subject. I'm very grateful you're coming to share your insights and your knowledge about this. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Paul. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam taslima. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Obviously, we all live in those very difficult times, watching every day the news, the ongoing genocide in Palestine, and listening to political analysts, commentators, and it's just natural and normal that the focus is on the political situation, geopolitical circumstances, why America supports Israel, Israel being at the heart of the Arab countries, in the Middle East, close to natural resources, all of that true, all of that correct. But actually, this is only a description of a later development in the history of the relationship between Israel and the West in general, but America more specifically. So what I'm going to say today does not dismiss or refute in any way that the fact that Israel is a political and strategic partner of America and other Western clans of America in the region, but it's actually also the origin of this relationship. It goes further back at times when those geopolitical circumstances did not exist. So you can't actually interpret what's happening and where we are today, in terms of the relationship between America and Israel, etc., by just thinking of where we, but looking at the world today. You can't do that. And I'm not a political analyst, and a lot of people would do a much better job analyzing what's going on today. I'm a historian, theologian, and I look at things historically. And what I'm interested in always is the background, how things develop. And I always believe that history is what I call is the interpretation of the present. Without history, you can't really often understand what's going on. And we live in a world of social media. And social media, one of the disadvantages of social media is that it focuses one's attention on the now and today. Mm-hmm. Often you lose the trend and you lose history in the course of doing that. So that's what I'm going to do today. Hopefully go back to the origin and look at the kind of root cause of the problem that the whole world have today, called Israel. This is not a problem for the Muslims, for the Arabs, for Palestinians. That's not true. And I'll get to this later, and I'll explain why it's causing harm to other countries, to the world at large. To locate the source and the origin of this particular issue, we can't go back to 2,000 years back, or whatever, over 2,000, when the Jews were in Palestine. That's too far. That's not going to give us actually the answer, because America did not exist. And the answer isn't either found in the 20th century, when the nation of Israel, the state of Israel, was formed. Actually, the origin of this special relationship, special position that Israel has come to have, goes back to the 17th century. And it doesn't go back to Palestine, the Holy Land. No, it goes back to the new land of America, or what was new to the Europeans, the settlers who moved there. And that's where I'm going to trace the origin even of Zionism, this political concept. And what I will show is that this kind of the original settlers of America developed and modeled a self-image on the biblical image of the Israelites being the chosen people of God. And we ended up with this self-image. Some would call it mythical. For me, mythical is not a good enough, sufficient description, because mythical can be benign, can be harmless. So it's not myth, it's not a myth, it's a supremacy. It's a supremacist ideology. And a supremacist ideology has only one connotation: harm. It's very harmful. It's very detrimental. And that's what it is. And the other thing is that, obviously, supremacy, when you talk supremacy, America or American supremacy is not the only supremacy. The concept does exist. There are various forms of it, often white supremacist ideologies. But American supremacy, which is usually referred to as American exceptionalism, is far more dangerous, and I will explain why. And I'm not going to speculate on that. I am going to talk history. So somebody will check what I'm saying. They can always check the facts I am going to quote here.
Right.
What is American exceptionalism? Just before we start, exceptional America is not only distinct America, different America, unique America. It means the best that we have, the best that can ever exist.
And they're taught this in schools. You talk to Americans, particularly older Americans as well. I'm not sure about what's going on at this moment in American schools. Maybe it's the same, but they certainly were taught just that they were unique, special. They were better than any other nation in the world. I mean, it really was taught throughout the American education system. It's quite extraordinary, really.
It is completely, it's part of the self-image, and I'll give more details about that. And before I start, just a little bit of clarification and explanation of the term supremacy, because we live in a world where we always talk about racism. That's a very common word. And then there's this word supremacy. And I want to, these two words often are used interchangeably, but actually there is a subtle kind of but important difference between the two. Racism, the term racism, usually focuses on the target of that discrimination. So you would say anti-Semitism, which means people who actually discriminate against the Jewish people. You would say Islamophobia, people who then discriminate against Muslims, those who did racism against black people. So these are racism. Always you talk about racism thinking of the victims of this discrimination. Supremacy, it works the other way around. Its focus is the people who have this self-belief that they are superior to others. As a result, the others are othered, but by implication, indirectly. The focus is actually on the supremacist. If somebody is think of them as being superior, then by implication they're looking down at the others. But their focuses are not the other. They are just so interested in that ego that they don't care as much about their victims. They're really working on themselves to try and look as good as they can to themselves and to people who think likewise. Obviously, there are lots of, we live actually, currently, there are lots of far-right supremacist ideologies, parties even in Europe gaining access to power, which makes them harmful, far more harmful than just being some marginal movement somewhere. They started to coordinate at times across countries. In Europe, we see this, for instance. But obviously, probably the most famous supremacist group that we all know of is the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK. And I'm going to mention something quickly about this, because today we look at it as a fringe group. And indeed, there are only several thousands of members now left of the KKK. But the KKK historically wasn't a fringe group, actually. It went through 3 phases of development. In the second phase, which is the one I'm going to pick on and be interested in particularly in, is it ran between the 20s, 1915 more specifically, actually, until around 1940, where it kind of declined. And then there was a third phase. During that, and more specifically, around the middle of the 13th of the last century, so around now 1924-25, there were at least 4 million people claimed to be members of the Ku Klux Klan. That's about, my calculation, around 3.5% of the American population at the time. Some estimates vary, and some of them take it to around potentially double that amount. A lot of people were members, but they would not declare their membership. These people were, and this is the example I'm trying to say to show that a supremacy is focused on themselves. So they think of them as superior. So they were against the Jews, they were against Black people, they were against immigrants, Hispanic people, etc., all kinds of things. But they were not, the focus here isn't actually listing all those people they are against, they were against. It's more about them being the more kind of superior people. And as a result, obviously, other people were victimized by their behaviors. I'm going to show now just a slide. This is, I'm going to move from that supremacist ideology that more or less died. And I'm going to talk about what I called a living supremacy, which is American exceptionalism. Yeah. And I'm going to try to show how, again, another point actually I missed there to mention. So if you think about what I said about the Ku Klux Klan, they were focused on their land, and in America, on the USA. They're trying to protect the USA from just the incoming of other immigrants, people they did disapprove of as being inferior to them. They were not actually thinking of how we're going to go out and then expand whatever ideology we believed in. It was the exact opposite. That is one difference why they are far to the rest of the world, to the external world, to the outside world, far less harmful than American exceptionalism. And I'll get to this further. But let's look at this particular question of American exceptionalism. And I'm going to start by looking at a survey which was done in 2019, and this is from the Institute for Global Affairs. Formerly, it was known as the Eurasia Group Foundation. And here you go, 42.5% roughly of Americans believe that America is exceptional because of what it stands for. That's what I mean by principles. because it has those fantastic principles, etc. Almost half of the population think just on the basis of its principles, America is exceptional. In other words, no other country in the world, has those principles. Theirs are just much better, exceptional, unique, and superior. And then 18% think that America is exceptional because of what it did to the world. So those 42.5 on the basis of what America stands for, and the other 18% think it is exceptional because of what it did for the world. And then we have only that leaves us with 39% who do not believe that America is exceptional. And those figures reflect the sample, and they run across all age groups. Sorry, and this is interesting. This is by age group now, and what you see here, red means those who believe America is exceptional on the basis of what it stands for, and that orangey kind of yellow color is because of what it did for the world. And what you can see here is that there's some decline.
Dramatic.
It's very important, and really it's a kind of a bit of light in this darkness. So what you see here is that clearly the change in the percentage of people who believe that America holds exceptional principles is massively declining with age group. Why is that? Well, I think there are at least two main reasons. First of all, immigrants coming from outside and who are exposed to completely different cultures and who have enjoyed the actions of America in other parts of the world. And also we have to say that it's general increased awareness of America's and what America has done. And so there is an element of, there's a significant change. One thing really that stands out as well here is that the change in the middle group, so kind of those who think America is exceptional on the basis of what it did for the world, hasn't actually declined by as much. I mean, it's about 17%. It ranges between 17, 18, it was about 20. That's still very, very significant. Now, it's difficult really to explain that, because anybody who knows what America has done in the world can't really justify holding this belief in any way. It's a form of detachment from reality. If it was happening at an individual level, the person would have been diagnosed with psychosis. That's what would have meant. They would have been, because they are also violent, they would have been sectioned. That would have happened if this was applied to a particular individual. Indeed, even if it was applicable to a group of people, where this group of people not hidden inside America. That's what would have happened to it. So that's the state of play. It's a very recent survey, and it gives you an idea. Like I say, there's a kind of a bit of hope there in terms of.
And this was done in 2019, as you say, but I can't help thinking that in 2023/24. Ongoing, that trajectory will continue, even more so. That the 18 to 29 group, for example, who said no, that will increase because is what well known. American youth now tend to be much more pro-Palestinian than ever before. So that means, in a sense, they're not going to be happy with Biden's financing and support of the military attack on the Palestinians. So I'm just projecting that this will continue. It might actually accelerate. Actually,
absolutely, I completely agree with you, Paul, on that point. I think what's happening in particular now, if you compare, just a kind of marginal point, in 2008, the attack on Gaza claimed about 1,400 people as victims, people killed. In 2014, that figure went up to 2,400, I think. Now we're going to get to 30. It looks 30,000 and counting. And the difference, of course, is that the availability of images, videos, and everybody sees what's going on. So I completely agree with you, Paul. This will have actually ultimately, as costly as it is right now in terms of lives, livelihood, everything, it will ultimately lead to a substantial and significant change in one of these kind of diseases that the world has right now, which is American exceptionalism.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Right. Now, let me move to what I call the curious case of Barack Obama. So,
or Barack Hussein Obama, to give him his fuller name.
Fair enough, but I think he might not feel very happy if I would have used the word Hussein there. So let's think of him as well. I'm going to do him a lot of good still, though, without using that name. So that's after attending a G20 conference in the UK, in London. 2 days after that, Barack Obama, in a news conference, said the following: I believe in American exceptionalism, just I suspect that the Brits believe in British exceptionalism and the Greeks believe in Greek exceptionalism. 2009. Now, what's interesting about this is that it's 2 days after G20. So you can see what's coming out here is that he's struggling. He's a conflicted character, which is why I'm picking up here. He's far more sophisticated, intellectual than the likes of George W. Bush, or, of course, Donald Trump, and many others indeed. But so what you see here is that he's just attended this kind of global cooperation conference, and you can see it's coming out there. But what happened is, as soon as he said that, he started getting attacked at home, of course, by all kinds of people, and of course, Republicans in particular. But then this concept is not only Republican. So he was attacked for saying that. And of course, he changed his tone, and he started to speak the proper language about American exceptionalism. And obviously, he's got lots to say, but this is another example. That's from 2014 in an address to the US Military Academy. I believe in American exceptionalism with every fiber of my being. But what makes us exceptional is not our ability to flout international norms and the rule of law. It's our willingness to affirm them through our actions. Again, there's an element, you can see he's confirming, reasserting, but there's something in the background of his mind. They're trying to tell them there's this kind of strong link between American exceptionalism and we do what we like. And he's trying to say, I'm really struggling with that, but I'm your president and our country is so much because it's a very free country, as you know. So, and you can see this conflicted character, the very highly intellectual person. And then I'm going to go back really to his early life and quote from his autobiography. And this is what he said. The pride in being American, the notion that America was the greatest country on earth, that was always a given. As a young man, I chaffed against books that dismissed the notion of American exceptionalism, got into long, drawn-out arguments with friends who insisted the American hegemon was the root of oppression worldwide. What you see here is a belief that he held from his early life, very young age, and it continued with him. But because he was aware, well-informed, in fact, because of his roots outside America, he was well aware of issues with America's behavior and actions in the world, and trying to kind of balance these two. It's impossible, but that's what he's trying. But without this belief, which he had as a young man, as he put it, he wouldn't have got to where he got. You can't actually become a U.S. president and you don't share this belief. You have this belief. You have to be a believer, a strong believer, with every fiber of your being, that America is exceptional to get there. And true to his words, this is what he called his autobiography, A Promised Land. And you can see the kind of issues where we are dealing.
Even that title, that laboring the obvious, A Promised Land, well, that reminds me of Israel, of course, the promised land being Canaan. So there's a biblical resonance there, but also that America, of course, being a land that had no people in it, the physical continent of North America, was a promised land. And the British and others who first went there occupied this land, which was theirs by divine right. That seems another subtext, which of course is completely wrong, because there were many population groups, nations and peoples already existence in the promised land, Canaan, and they had to be exterminated. And of course, they actually were exterminated famously in North America, as they were, well, according to the Bible anyway, in in Canaan, literal Canaan in Palestine. So it's a very ominous title in one way, A Promised Land, when you actually read it in its biblical context, because that bespeaks to me of genocide, because that's explicitly what the Israelites were commanded to do to those who lived in the promised land, and that is to kill the women, the children, and the babies. 1 Samuel 15 famously, and other places where this is actually commanded of the Israelis, or the Israelites, I should say, as they're then called. So this is a subtext here of genocide, I would argue, quite strongly. But he doesn't mean that, does he? He means a promised land. How wonderful! This is our destiny. This is our future. How blessed we are by God. And this is the great paradox, isn't it? That on the other hand, it's of great promise, of destiny, of fulfillment. And on the other hand, of genocide, the literal extermination of whole peoples, targeted explicitly by the divine command. So it's a very paradoxical, isn't it? A self-contradictory narrative of blessing and curse at the same time. For different peoples, obviously, blessing for the occupiers and a curse for everyone else. But it's a very complex and troubling title, A Promised Land, if you decode it or unpack it from its resonances biblically and so on. Anyway,
that's exactly, Paul, why I picked Barack Obama as a curious case, because he's a curious case, because unlike others, he's well aware of what America has done and is doing, yet he can't let go of this faith, and trying to put them together, and you end up with this conflicted president, whom in 2015 the Washington Post said about him, he is the president that used the term American exceptionalism more than anyone else, and in a more varied way. And this is very interesting, and that's, you can see this here, but it was part of his language, and it actually never stopped being so. So let me move on now away from Obama. We've had enough of him. So,
yes.
And, I think, let me see. Let me stop this for now. Okay. So back now to American supremacy. And I want to say a few things about the danger of American supremacy. I spoke earlier about other supremacist ideology, and I said they're all dangerous in their own way, but the danger is very localized, very limited. So they all usually operate within that particular country, let's say, and that's what happened even with the KKK. American supremacy is very, very different, because American supremacy operates across the world, everywhere. Its domain is the whole of this planet. That makes it on its own very different from other supremacist ideologies. But then, if that was not bad enough, it is supported and indeed embraced by the only superpower in this world. And that superpower happened to have immense power. In this sense, this particular supremacist ideology is actually the first of its kind, the worst we are living as we speak.
If I could just say, sorry, I mean, sorry, your flow. Just a word that's not often used in mainstream discourse, political reporting, and analysis about America, and this subject we're discussing now, is the word empire. The American empire. It's not really. It doesn't really go. The American empire, is that really a fitting term? I think it's a very fitting term, obviously, because America's reach extends way beyond its borders. It has military bases all over the Middle East, the Far East, you name it. Its imprint, its material presence, controlling, monitoring, going into war, is all over the planet in a way that even the British Empire never extended its reach that far. So I think it's a super empire. It's not just a regular empire. Yes. It's an uber empire. But it's not a word that's usually, I know the word is used in some left-wing discourse, of course, but in terms of so-called mainstream Western discourse, it's not used. And it's always struck me as odd, because it probably is an empire territorially. I mean, it occupies countries, Iraq and Afghanistan, and then retreats and so on. It's very much on the ground around the globe. So it's just I just wanted to throw that word in, or that concept.
Yeah. Well, even when you look at places, countries where they don't have any military presence there's also the concept of cultural occupation. There's the economic occupation. There is the political occupation. There are lots of countries you can look at and say, well, they're basically like a client states of America, but I can't see any troops there. What is that? That's colonization. That's
when you mention certain countries in the Middle East, which I won't just spare any criticism. There are a number of examples in the Middle East where these countries exist because of American power, not in spite of it, and they are formally, technically independent, but as you say, they are client states in all but name.
Absolutely. And so American supremacy is obviously a self-image, is a belief, but it's more than a belief. I compare it to religion, and I see it more as a religion because it has its own institutions as well. A belief is something you hold dearly, something you believe in, but that has some apparatus as well. There are people actually who work to implement that faith. In this sense, it is the most dangerous religion that has ever existed in this world. They talk about Islam, they talk about Judaism, because in Europe it was a danger, Judaism. They talk about all kinds of religions. There has not been, yes, it's not a religion in the sense that it's an Abrahamic religion, etc., claiming to have come of God in the same way, but it's modeled on that, on Christianity and Jewish kind of concepts. But it is actually a dangerous religion. It forces itself on the rest of the world. As a Muslim, for instance, you may think, oh, I would like actually, because I believe in Islam, I would like actually to share those thoughts with my friends, with people I know, and people even I don't know. And I want actually to help them see how I see the world and may actually agree with me and share my faith ultimately. But that's something you offer to them. And they may or may not accept it. They may not take it. America is very different. American exceptionalism is something that is imposed on the world, and the world has to put up with it. You've got no option there. American exceptionalism, as we spoke, it's the self-image of superiority. I would like to mention here one particular verse from the Quran that refutes any such self-image, a claim to superiority from anybody and everybody. And it comes from An-Nisa 46. This is chapter 4, verse 46. If you'd like to check it there in your... And it says in Arabic, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, أَلَمْ تَرَ إِلَى الَّذِينَ يُزَكُّونَ أَنفُسَهُمْ بَلِ اللَّهُ يُزَكِّي مَن يَشَاءُ وَلَا يُظْلَمُونَ فَتِيلًا. It may be translated as, have you not seen those who commend themselves? Rather, Allah commends whom He wills, and injustice is not done to them in the slightest. Here, the address is not actually to only any one particular group. It's one of those universal words in the Quran. This applies to Christians, Jews, Muslims, everybody. You don't see yourself. You do not commend yourself. You don't say, I'm superior. Doesn't matter. Your faith, you may think your faith is superior, as in you are closer to the truth in terms of what you understand is going on, what the world is about. That's absolutely fine. You can have, but you can't lay claim to being superior to others on the basis of you having access to that truth that others don't have access to. This is very distinct kind of and very important distinction between the two, because at times people tell you, oh, religion is cause all of that. No, first of all, religion does not call for that. Islam does not call for that. Second, religion, if you look at what any particular religion did to this world, well, I'll tell you something, there's nothing worse than this religion called American exceptionalism. Now, I'm going to mention a notorious name, somebody called Madeleine Albright, who was Secretary of State in the US. And I'm going to quote a couple of the things. She was very, very good at saying the most offensive things a human being can think about other people she did not like. She was very good at that and highly articulate actually in doing that. So in one instance in the 1990s, I don't know exactly where, and she said about Iraq the following: if we have to use force, it is because we are America. We are the indispensable nation. We stand tall and we see further than other countries into the future. I mean, what kind of narcissistic language is this? I mean, if you meet somebody on the street who speaks this kind of language about themselves, what are you going to think of them? But as it happened, this is a highly regarded person in the Clinton administration at the time. In another quote, multilateral, she's talking about America behaving in multilateral way when we can, unilateral when we must. So basically it means nothing. If we think we have to go all the way our own, we do it all the way. So being multilateral is just kind of a bit of double speak, really. If you come along with me, it's multilateral. If you would like to let me down and let me really disappointed with you, I'm going unilateral, and you will ultimately come back and support me, and you've got no option. That's Madeleine Albright. That's a form of kind of expressions of this American exceptionalism that we are talking about. This is why, as I mentioned earlier, American exceptionalism is a form of psychosis. In any other context, that's how people would have looked at it. So where did it come from? Where did it start? That's really what we'd like to get to. I think it can be traced back, it's usually traced back to as early as the 17th century. More specifically, when the Puritans arrived in 1630 to New England. Puritans from England arrived to New England, and then there were this particular instance about 700 of them on the I think it's called the Arbella, I think, the ship that carried them, and with them was John Winthrop.
I thought it was the Mayflower, but maybe it was another ship called that.
Which one?
The Mayflower, famously.
That's a different one.
Sorry,
it's a different one. The one I'm talking about here, the 1630, in which John Winthrop arrived.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And he ultimately became one of the founders of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. This is one of the 13 colonies that about 140 years later would end up leading the revolution, American Revolution, and then effectively becoming the United States of America. So he was one of the founders there, and he gave this it's a sermon. It's not clear whether he actually wrote it in England and he never delivered it, or he actually gave it on the Arbella, or it's not clear. But in that sermon, he was speaking to fellow Puritans, and he said, for we must consider that we shall be a city upon a hill, a city upon a hill. And this actually, he's quoting Matthew 5:14, for those who would like to check it out. And this is from a speech sermon by Jesus, in which he says, "You are the light of the world, of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hidden." So that imagery, and you can see how he's looking at, and he's talking to fellow Puritans, and Puritans were already kind of quite full of themselves, really. They were not very happy with the changes and reform that were taking place in America. They thought they did not go far enough, getting rid of Catholic heritage, etc. So they were kind of, and they were also believed, and they believed they were had this covenant with God, and this destructive concept of covenant that can turn anybody into a just complete a narcissist, basically, because they think they have a covenant with God. And what's interesting is that that became basically a phrase that was picked up. It's not because of the phrase. It really kind of represented an idea, represented a particular mindset that then endured over the centuries and was developed and quoted over and over and over again. It's interesting that within 7 years of delivering that sermon, by then John Winthrop had become governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and that's when he approved of the well-known massacre of the Bigfoot Indians, where about, I think, 400 of them were killed. And he actually got here a note where he memorialized the victory by declaring a public day of thanksgiving after its soldiers returned home. So that's the same person who spoke about that city on a hill, and you can see what he's doing to people who are not on that.
The hill in the Bible often means Zion, which is the mountain, Mount Zion. It's the same thing, actually, which is, of course, Jerusalem, where the temple was built, Solomon, and then the Second Temple. So it's not just any old hill. It's not just like a hill metaphor. This is explicit reference in the Bible to Jerusalem itself and the temple of Jerusalem, which of course has been destroyed 2,000 years now. So there's identification there that we, the new Christians in America, are the new Israel, that there's a sense of identifying the type, the typology there is the same. So there were the Jews then, now we are the new Israel now, and we have our promised land. And, you know, as I keep on saying, everyone's pointing out, because the Prime Minister of Israel now, Netanyahu himself, pointed out when he was, talked about the genocide that the Jews in the Amaleks, exactly, the tribe of the Amaleks. So these ideas are not just history. This is contemporary politics, and it's an ideology that is motivating the killing of people as we speak. So it couldn't, you know, the thing about the Bible, by the way, is a different point. But, you know, why should we bother reading the Bible? Who cares about this dusty old text? Well, a lot of people care about it, and it informs government policy still in America, for a lot of people anyway, and in Israel and around the world. So it's very much a live text in a way we wish it wasn't alive in that way, but it is used and weaponized now to justify genocide as we speak. So it can't be more important that we wise up about what's really going on here, and the religious roots. And often in the West, Western journalists don't like talking about religion very much, and the theology and the metaphysics behind what's going on. But the people involved do talk about it. The settlers in Palestine are motivated by their twisted biblical narrative. So yeah, it really matters, the Bible.
Yeah, I mean, the Bible was the most read book in America, even at the time of the revolution, and when the Constitution was written down, it was highly influential in the thinking, in the wording, moral values, and whether these were put into practice or not is a different story. But everybody was highly influenced. And when you and these immigrants we're talking about, who ultimately ended up forming this kind of the seed of American exceptionalism, were all Christians who believed in the Hebrew Bible. They believed in what happened in the concept of chosen people of God, promised land, covenant. All of those concepts were very familiar to them. They believed in them, and ultimately, it's not really a huge leap to see how this belief was moved from being about historical Israel to being about new America. And that's exactly what happened. That's the start. And then it developed and it continued and it endured over time. And this concept of obviously being city on a hill, it came very close to the concept of chosenness. So the chosen people of God. And then this term, this concept starting to be used all the time. Even somebody like Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, who abolished slavery, of course, used the word, he described Americans as almost chosen people. He was a bit careful, given that, but he spoke about almost chosen people. And that was in 1861. That's while president. In 1862, I've got another quote from him. He said about America, the last best hope of earth. The last, but look at this is, by the way, we're talking kind of 1860s. So this isn't America of today with achievements, etc. That's there and then. That was the belief. So this belief endured regardless. It was there all the time. Yeah. And of course, somebody who picked up this particular phrase, city on a hill, and was completely fascinated by it, almost obsessed, was Ronald Reagan. Because it obviously was a Republican, and he spoke about, but the concept of city on a hill was not good enough for him. He turned it into a shining city on a hill, as if that wasn't big enough, visible enough, superior enough. Let's add a little bit of light to it as well. So now it's the shining city on a hill. If you listen to, for those who are interested, and if they want to listen to his farewell speech, recorded in his own voice in 1989, where he, obviously, like everybody, every president, they have to look back and then review their career, because everybody will have to be grateful for what they've done, etc. And then he obviously picked up the subject that he couldn't let go of, which is the shining city on a hill. When you listen to him talking about it, the tone and the wording is really kind of reminiscent of something like, you could imagine Samuel Coleridge talking about Kubla Khan and Xanadu. He was supposedly received in a dream. That's what he said. And when you listen to him talking about that idea, shining city on a hill, that's really what I thought of when I listened to him, the way he's put it. Now, whether he trained to put it the way he did, but it was, frankly, I almost believed him. So it was this effective. So that was Reagan. And that belief in America's exceptionalism, as I said, endured. It was very early on, when America was nothing other than few settlers among the native population, and it continued to this day. And what this tells you is that just confirms it's just a faith. It's nothing else. It's a faith. It has no roots in history. It has no roots in what. So when I showed earlier that survey from 2019, some people talking about America is exceptional because of what it stands for, and America is exceptional because of what it did to the world. They're really talking nonsense there, because actually this belief has nothing to do with any justification. you did not need to just, as people who believed it at no point use the same justification. It all the time, circumstances change, but the belief itself, it's not changed. And that's where I established the historical link between Israel and America. Americans, the first settlers, saw themselves this way as chosen people who were given the promised land and who had this kind of special relationship with God because they were all religious. They modeled this image on the image of the Israelites in the Hebrew Bible. And as it, of course, the Hebrew Bible is a kind of ethnocentric book where the Israelites are the focus of it. It's a history of them. So it was very easy for them then to use it, model it on themselves. And then we ended up with this kind of
there's another remarkable parallel, which is obvious. Both of these peoples, the Americans and the Israelis, are both settler colonialists, and so that there is that kind of, they're both very similar. They both are people who believe they have a divine right to occupy other people's land and to cleanse them of that land and just kill them. The Amalekites, as you mentioned. The Israeli PM recently explicitly referencing this trope, which has been used throughout Jewish history as the archetypal enemy of the Jews and who should be exterminated. And of course, the Native Americans suffered a similar fate, of course, as well. So they're blood brothers. They're of a type, really. There's a familial likeness between the Americans and the Israelis in that they both have an ideological justification for genocide, but it's cloaked in shiny language, literally the shiny city on a hill. So those that don't think beyond the propaganda can identify with that, with a sense of honor, perhaps. We are honorable people, even though the reality is the opposite. It's very dishonorable.
You're absolutely right. This settler colonization is very much what happened in the Bible, in Palestine, we're told by the Hebrew Bible, and exactly what happened in America. And of course, if you justify, and a lot of people, I'll get to that point, justified what happened to the local, inhabitants of Canaan before the Israelites went in, they justified it on the basis God allowed this to happen, God wanted to happen. Then they also justified what they did themselves to the Indians, to the native population of America when they moved in. Now, as I mentioned, the concept, the faith of American exceptionalism is effectively an act of plagiarism. It was plagiarized from the Hebrew Bible by people who said, okay, the Israelites were the chosen people of God. Now we are the new chosen people of God. They were given promised land. This is our promised land. They are effectively holy to God. We are now the new holy people to God. Now, the Jews can always go back to their Bible and say, well, that's not really what we say about ourselves. That's what God says about us, because that's the scripture. Now, so they can't quote the Bible. Americans can only quote themselves. They have no other source. It's complete and utter plagiarism. They stole it from the Hebrew Bible in the same way they very efficiently and effectively stole the land in America. They have very good history with material and immaterial things when they steal them. Now, I would like to introduce another idea. So if we go back to the slides, Manifest Destiny.
Manifest Destiny. Some great paintings called Manifest Destiny in the art galleries. Some great art, I mean, to celebrate this by American artists. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Anyway.
It is to celebrate, isn't it? Okay.
It is.
So this concept was introduced, usually attributed to somebody called John Sullivan. He coined this exact term in 1845. He used it before without putting it in this particular wording, but that's what he did. And this is one of the quotes in something he wrote. And he said, the right of our manifest destiny to overspread and to possess the whole of the continent, which Providence has given us for the development of the great experiment of liberty and federated self-government entrusted to us. That's what he said. He was a journalist. He was an editor. He was an active, actually, kind of supporter of the Confederate States of America, even though earlier he was against slavery. And so he defended earlier, he ultimately ended up defending the institution of slavery. What he's talking about here is effectively going west. So expanding effectively the land that was being colonized. And I think here specifically he might have been talking about Oregon and Mexico, if I remember correctly. And then what happened is that late in the 19th century, this concept of spreading the American experiment and the American model went actually beyond American boundaries. And then you found America getting involved in the Philippines, Indonesia, Puerto Rico, and Cuba. So it's become kind of it's a doctrine. It's a doctrine. It's not always people would kind of Americans would necessarily confess to adopting it, but it's really what everybody knows has been happening. And if you take the descriptions there and apply them today, they fit absolutely well. And then, so this is what we would call colonialism. That's effectively the concept. And I would like to kind of talk about something here that, because what's implied here, what Americans always talk about in terms of exceptionalism, two really main concepts, democracy and freedom. Democracy and freedom. So the president of the US is the leader of the free world, as our own leaders in the UK, France, everywhere would like to call them, as if it's prayer they have to repeat. So I would like to just to draw some focus here on kind of recast the concept of American exceptionalism in other terms, and just explain what democracy has done. So this national election, so democracy is based on having an election, a national election, whereby you end up choosing effectively that when you have democratically elected leaders. So national election, you've got a democracy in place. What we end up usually having is this, what I call international dictatorship. So what happens when they talk about democracy, they stop at the middle and the second expression there. So we are a democracy. Now that democracy was supposed to be about their country, ruling their own country, leading their country, giving their people the best living conditions, etc. But the language and the promise has to be internal. That's the whole point of a democracy. It's national. It is national. Yet we, the victims of, as many other people, the victims of American exceptionalism, we suffer what is the other face this national democracy, which is international dictatorship. So dictatorship, this term is often used in a derogatory way to talk about the others, meaning those who do not have democracy in their own country. Yeah, well, absolutely, I agree with you. That is called dictatorship, but that's what I would call national dictatorship. So that's a dictator who's actually focused on controlling their own, her own country and people. But what you create here, one national democracy, creates international dictatorship that then goes out and actually forces itself on so many other countries. That is another way of looking at the concept of American democracy.
And if I could just add, you quote John O'Sullivan, 1845, who talks about how Providence has given us, this continent for liberty and self-government. It sounds wonderful, but this was before the American Civil War, and I think it was 1861. So at this time, in 1845, slavery was a reality and completely practiced and accepted part of the American manifest destiny. So this was a democracy built on the slavery of a whole race of people, of course, black chattel slavery. So it's interesting how he doesn't see any contradiction there between the reality of this great experiment of liberty and the existence of one of the most appalling manifestations of slavery in history. They go together. You might as well like people like John Stuart Mill in England at the same time, actually, the contemporary, who wrote the famous book on liberty, Manifesto for Liberty, Individual Liberty. And yet he advocates for what he calls barbaric peoples, i.e. non-white people, despotism as the most suitable form of government for the rest of the world. So liberty is for us, for Britain, in the same way that democracy is for America, but internationally it's for dictatorship. So one can only scratch the surface very little, but before one sees these glaring anomalies and contradictions, the endorsement, acceptability of slavery in America at the same time that they boast about liberty and self-governance in their country. I mean, it's unbelievable.
It is. It is exceptional, actually. Yeah, it's definitely. So that's one take on the concept of democracy that we are being haunted by. And then there's the other concept of liberty, freedom. So here we go. Here we have national freedom, which is linked to democracy. But what it leads to is international oppression, subordination, control, you name it. So again, these two concepts, democracy and freedom, they are actually used only in a particular way, in a proper way, let's say, nationally, but they actually result in their exact opposite internationally. So if anybody speaks about them in positive terms, they can only describe an internal system, national system. To the rest of the world, everybody suffered. Countless people. We're talking about Palestine. Palestine, a lot of people there are suffering now, but actually over the centuries, you're talking millions and millions and millions, just countless people suffered the American democracy and American freedom. These are the outcomes. I might as well just mention something that actually, we just, I think, stop this for now. Yeah. Okay. So I remember when came to the UK in 1992 with my wife. And one of the things, obviously at the time, Saddam was in power in Iraq, war, etc. Saddam was a dictator, proper dictator, but he was a fair dictator. He was dictator with everybody. And not the way they present him here. Oh, yeah, he was dictator only against the Shias. That's complete nonsense, which resulted in changing the balance in Iraq ultimately. But that's a different story. But what I'm trying to say here is that when I came, one of the things, in addition to so many myths about Iraq, I was struck by the newspapers, media, etc., attacking Saddam often for killing his own people. Right. So killing other people is actually better kind of than killing his own people. Mm-hmm. Are these mad? Mm-hmm. I'm just looking at it, listening to it. Can't they actually understand what they're saying, the implication of what they're saying? You're saying that killing one's own people is so bad that as if killing someone else's people is okay. يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم شعوبا وقبائل. The Quran says that we created people as nations and tribes. But people, إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم. The most noble of you in the eyes of Allah is the most pious of you. And piety doesn't mean just pray, etc. It's a broader term. So this is how you look at it. This is the concept of people and peace in the Quran. What on earth are they talking about? So Saddam was bad because he killed Iraqis. So bad, he killed his own people. But when the Americans come and kill the Iraqis, not that bad. Liberators, aren't they? So I just wanted to mention this kind of, because it's a personal experience that I found quite kind of shocking. Moving on, since we're talking about biblical concepts, imageries, etc., let's move to the founding fathers. Those seven, not yet, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. So this term was coined by Warren Harding in 1916. He was a senator at the time, and then he used it again when he became, in his inauguration, when he became president, founding fathers. And that's a reference to the 7 leaders who ultimately led the revolution, etc. I haven't come across anybody who says, you know, founding fathers is a religious kind of, give it any religious connotation. But as somebody who's been looking at this and see just Hebrew biblical imageries everywhere, I just could not notice the similarity between this term and the concept of patriarchs in the Bible, which refers to Abraham, obviously, Jacob.
The word patriarch itself, it comes from the patri, meaning, you know, father of people.
Exactly.
It is exactly the same concept in the Bible.
Now, it's possible somebody must have established some link between them. I haven't seen it myself, but I'm just saying that it's kind of there. And as I mentioned earlier, really the Bible was quoted extensively by the founding fathers. It was the most read and the most quoted book. What's also interesting is that those founding fathers were also portrayed as religious figures during their lives and also afterwards. George Washington, after a first American president, of course, and leader of the revolution, after he died, he was imagined and portrayed as a prophet, and at times even as Jesus himself. And he was also called the American Joshua. The American Joshua. Now, we all know what Joshua did in the Bible. You spoke about this earlier.
It's the book of Joshua, by the way, folks. You can read it in the Old Testament. Some choice genocides in there.
Yeah, I'm going to quote just one from Joshua 6:21. Then they devoted to destruction by the edge of the sword, all in the city, both men and women, young and old, oxen, sheep, and donkeys. And now this kind of, so founding fathers were actually compared and likened to the kind of genocidal figures. And that was okay. That was all right.
Yes. I mean, it's an important caveat, I think, although what you're saying is true. It is the case, from what I can tell, having read academic works on the archaeology of these areas of Canaan, that though the Bible does describe conquests of Canaan and the extermination of peoples and nations and so on in a very brutal way, targeting
evidence.
There is no evidence.
Absolutely not.
If you go down the sedimentary layer, the strata of the earth, you should expect to find, archaeologists say, evidence of mass genocides, of burnings, of rubble, of mass grave. You don't find it. And so the academic wisdom now is that there may have been a piecemeal incursion into the land of Canaan over time by smaller groups of Israelites, whatever, because obviously they did end up there. But the biblical story is probably a myth, which is kind of nice in one way, but on the other hand, the myth has still been read always as history until very recently by Christians and the church, and by people, always taken as factual, as it is today by many Israelis, of course. But it probably, this is a great irony of history, it probably didn't happen like that at all. There's no mass genocide. The Bible is fiction. It's a myth because there's evidence for it. You would see the evidence in the archaeological record. No one's ever found it.
This particular quote I have from Joshua 6:21 is about Jericho. And Jericho is a place where there is no evidence that Jericho
is one of the oldest continuous inhabited cities on the planet, and archaeology has been done on this area right down through the sedimentary areas, down to that period of time when Joshua allegedly, wrote these events. There's no evidence that Jericho collapsed and all these people were killed. So this is legend and fiction that was always read as history after that, I guess. but scholars know it didn't happen, and yet it's been used to justify and give legitimation, divine legitimation, to genocide. It's a great irony that a myth has been weaponized to actually make it real after all, even though it was never real in the first place.
It doesn't really matter, because ultimately it's about the faith, isn't it? People believe that this is what God instructed them to do, and they act accordingly. The fact that you were trying to exonerate the Bible, really, or the early Israelites, and say, well, they did not actually do that.
This is the research. I mean, I'm not trying to take an ideological side here. It's just the case that often in the Bible states things as historical actually are myth. And whether it be the universal flood under Noah in Genesis chapter 6, I think, there is no evidence of a universal global flood that engulfs the whole planet, which is what the state text says. The Quran has a much more limited flood, of course, in that particular area of the world. So it's not a problem for the Quran. But for the Bible, it's a big problem. And you get multiple examples like that of statements which is like the Israelite exit from Exodus from Egypt. You know, millions of people left and crossed over. Impossible figures, impossible. No one can. They are literally impossible historically. So that's not true either. But you can have a much smaller group, perhaps, and scholars do argue this. That did, well, you might argue this. That made their traverse across the Sinai Desert into the so-called.
We actually do. Probably we did that kind of really quite detailed video at the time about the Exodus. Yeah, absolutely right. What the Quran says is.
You can't say what the Bible says. Unfortunately, literally, you really have to check it against independent investigations. Often it's not true, and it's interesting. I mean, it's a different subject entirely. When you check the Quran's narrative, it doesn't suffer the same consequences at all. It's much more nuanced and careful in what it says. Well, that's a different subject.
Correct. Correct. So another concept. So we spoke about chosenness. We spoke about promised land, but there are other actually kind of terms that were also borrowed from the Hebrew Bible. So you come across America being described as the new Israel. So you've come across there's somebody called Ezra Stiles, who's well known, and he spoke about American Israel. You come across something like even the concept of Redeemer Nation, so a nation that was actually there to rescue the world. And it's very much, these are all highly theological, religious terms, completely borrowed from the Hebrew Bible, have no evidence whatsoever, but they become actually part of the normal language. So people use this language, this kind of terms, and nobody look at them and frown at them and say, "What are you saying?" That's actually very, very normal. And during the War of Independence, the struggle of Americans for independence were actually portrayed as a new Exodus. Even the English king, George the Third, was actually likened to Pharaoh. So what you have here, again, a recast of religious history, Israelite history, onto the new America.
Just a footnote on that. I mean, I in the past, I used to read quite about English history during the Civil War period, during the 17th century in England. And one of Christopher Hill, the great English, was actually a Marxist historian, but he wrote incredible books on the Cultural Revolution and the people at that time in England. And one of the things he stressed a great deal, was very, very true, is the absolute centrality in England at that time of the Bible itself. The Bible was the book through which you interpreted absolutely everything: politics, the monarchy, republicanism, the people, you know, who are the new the Israelites. England then was and it's difficult to you know, we really appreciate just how absolutely important and central the Bible was in England. And that was exported to America, obviously, because the original settlers were English, because they were the most persecuted Puritans who really had a fanatical devotion to the Bible. But it was shared by all society, whether it be Anglo-Catholics or Catholics, or everyone saw the Bible as central. So the American is not unique or exceptional in that sense, in seeing their polity, their political system politically, they're just reusing ideas that were very common at that time in the 17th century and 18th century subsequently. But it seems to, because of secularization, particularly in Europe, the Bible's been sidelined completely, really, I would suggest. But in America, for many, it's still an icon, you know, unless you can refer to the Bible, whether it be Saddam Hussein, of course, is in the Bible, the book Apocalypse, or the European Union, or Hitler, or whatever, you know, you could always find these contemporary figures somewhere in the Bible. And it sounds crazy, and it is crazy, but it's because for many Americans still, although less so now in Europe, the Bible is the way you look at everything. And unless we appreciate this, the iconic status of the Bible in American culture and religious life, we're not going to get it. We're just not going to understand America. Now, of course, a lot of Americans now are quite secular, so there is a change going on, but it's there still, and in the past it was even more so.
Yeah, what's interesting as well, just to add to what you've just said, when the first settlers arrived there, the Bible, just before, you know, all the way before the revolution, the Bible was read as meaning you have to actually follow the king. There was no concept of democracy. It's about the king, the ruler, etc. When we got to the revolution, the Bible had to be reinterpreted. Now the Bible supports democracy, and that confirms your point here. What matters? The Bible is a means. I want something, the Bible is going to give it to me. But it also shows the central role of the Bible. But then the Bible loses its own definition. What is the Bible? The Bible becomes a reflection of my wishes and hopes and dreams, etc. The Bible does not have an external existence. It's what I think of it, depending on my circumstances at the time. But it remains very vital and critical to my life. You're absolutely right.
Yes.
So, looking at, again, one point to kind of repeat here is that all these concepts, as versatile, related as they are, and coming from the Hebrew Bible, have no historical basis. They were completely self-proclaimed by the settlers. And you can see now the link between how America sees itself and how Israel, how important for Israel to be there. Because if Israel is not there, it's only something mentioned in an old book, etc., called the Bible, which is very, very important for us. But imagine of this Israel is recreated. It comes into being. This is the Bible coming back into life. The Bible that is now the proof of my own existence and self-image has actually independent evidence, elsewhere proof, actually in the Holy Land. In this case, what I share, the Americans, what they share with the Israelites, is not shared values, unless genocide is now a value. So that's what they share. They share this image, self-image, that they found in the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah.
So when America intervenes to kind of strengthen Israel, to let them be their population in Palestine, let them be in control, treat them differently, and exceptionalize them, as I'm going to say later, that's all linked to how America sees itself. If the Israelites aren't there, where's the evidence of America? America the belief, America the faith, America the psychosis. It doesn't exist. But when the Israelites are there and the Bible has been kind of affirmed on the ground, then everything I see about myself being exceptional is actually there for everybody to see. And so protecting concept of chosenness, the rights of the Israelites or Israelis to Palestine becomes a proxy way of affirming Americans' chosenness and Americans' right to the land they occupied. Now, we have been talking about slightly different expressions here. We've been talking exceptionalism, and we've been talking chosenness, promised land, Exodus, Redeemer Nation. All of these are religious terms. Exceptionalism actually is a relatively new term. It's a secular term. Right. Exceptionalism itself does not carry any religious connotation. It has this kind of superiority connotation to it, but it's not actually religious itself. It just say we are unique and better than everybody else. And the reason it entered into the language is because not everybody is comfortable now using religious language to describe themselves and their self-image. So there are people who would believe in the same concept of chosenness, etc., but they don't want to describe this faith in these terms. And this is why we ended up recasting this concept, this religious concept, on the term, the neutral term, exceptionalism, which became the term that often leaders would use, American presidents. They would use still God and God-related terms, but not as often as they would use exceptionalism. And as I mentioned earlier, because this exceptionalism is worldwide, applies everywhere, it has become the most dangerous form of supremacist ideology. I would like to move now to a very important concept that's really at the heart and foundation of what we're talking about, which is Zionism. Zionism is a concept that has a long history, goes back centuries, in a mild way, if you like, not very strong. But obviously, it took a quite developed strongly and became more focused in the late 19th century. And then there was the first Zionist Congress in Basel, in Switzerland, in 1897. And Zionism in there was defined as, quote, Zionism strives to create for the Jewish people a home in Palestine secured by public law. That's how it defined Zionism. I'm gonna now in 1917, November 1917, the Foreign Secretary at the time, Arthur Balfour, Foreign Secretary here in the UK, issued what is known as the Balfour Declaration.
Yep.
And I think if I put it back here, do you see it, Paul? Or?
No, we've got the words Balfour Declaration. I mean, I didn't see anything.
Yes, that's exactly what we're what we're after. So that's this is what it is.
Yeah.
This was sent in a letter to a Jewish a leader of the Jewish community in the UK called Lord Rothschild, and so it goes: His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best at endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. And at the time when this was made, I think if I just... At the time when this was made, the non-Jewish population, or non-Jews, were made about over 90% of the population in Palestine. Some statistics suggest that the Jews were maybe as little as 6% at the time when this was made. And this is why this particular declaration is notoriously described as the declaration, the promise of those who do not own to those who do not deserve. So those who don't own, being the British and whoever bought into it, and those who don't deserve, being the Jews, meaning the Jews who are living outside Palestine. That's not their homeland, actually. They'll have to come back and then take the land from others. So Zionism, in this case, it's a kind of settler colonialism. That's what it is. This is exactly what happened in America, is a point you mentioned earlier. And that's what happened. If you look at how Zionism was implemented, and this strategy is effectively just encouraging migration when it wasn't war, it wasn't gradual, and they took over the land, and they use all kinds of techniques, buying land, forcing people to leave, by terrorism, etc.
It's interesting that in the early days of the National Socialist government in Germany in the 1930s, the Nazis were very actively cooperating with Zionists to resettle German Jews in Palestine. And you can even see some coins that were minted by the German government, the Nazis themselves. On the one side, the swastika, of course, and on the other side, the Star of David. And this was to commemorate this so-called partnership between the Jews, the German Jews, and they were encouraged to go back to occupy Palestine. So in a way, I mean, this is very controversial to say this. So there's a British politician, Ken Livingstone, who was the mayor of London, who was vilified by the established media here for lying about this, because he said this happened. But it does happen. It's well known. There's plenty of evidence it happened. Now, I'm not saying, obviously, later on, the Nazis took a very different attitude, a genocidal attitude. But early on, they actually cooperated in resettling Jews from Germany in Palestine. So they were pro-Zionist. Can you believe that?
That's the whole point I mentioned earlier about supremacists. Supremacists focus on their own, on themselves. They're not really, they would like to get rid of the others.
Yes.
They're not interested. Where they go, it's of no, they don't care. I mean, the Nazis could have just thrown the Jews anywhere and they wouldn't have cared about them, because they are caring about effectively purifying, if you like, their own content.
They weren't doing it for honorable reasons, don't get me wrong. The Nazis weren't doing it because they cared. They did it because they wanted an efficient way of removing these people, as you say. Yeah, absolutely.
So the Balfour Declaration is notorious. Everybody knows about it. Anybody who knows anything about the Palestinian problem knows about it. But what people don't know is that, and even when I grew up in Iraq, of course, and I always was even taught that at school, that this is the Balfour Declaration, this is how the occupation of Israel started. But the reality is the Zionist movement and the support for Zionism goes back much earlier before that. And I'm going to go back, it goes back as early as a century. And more specifically, and I'm going to show you a slide here. John Adams is a founding father.
So president of the United States, of course.
Yes, he was the second president from 1797 to 1801. He liked the writings of a Jewish writer called Mordecai Noah, who was the most important and well-known Jew in the U.S. At the time. And he wrote to him, after reading a particular book about travels in Africa and elsewhere, he wrote to him a letter. So John Adams wrote to this Zionist, and he wrote to him the following. Now, remember, this was 100 years before the Balfour Declaration. I could find it in my heart to wish that you had been at the head of 100,000 Israelites, indeed, as well as disciplined as the French army, and marching with them into Judea and making conquest of that country and restoring your nation to the dominion of it. For I really wish the Jews again in Judea, an independent nation, for as I believe the most enlightened men of it have participated in the ameliorations of the philosophy of the age. Once restored to an independent government and no longer persecuted, they would soon wear away some of the asperities and peculiarities, he couldn't stop himself having a bit of a go here, of their character, possibly in time become liberal Unitarian Christians. Well, yeah, he's got it all. What a dream! A dream just contains everything.
It's just like him. Presumably, he was a liberal Unitarian Christian then.
Yeah. For your Jehovah is our Jehovah, And that's a lie, of course. And your God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is our God. Obviously,
and lie, because obviously Orthodox Jews at that time certainly did not regard Christianity as in any way acceptable. They regarded it as idolatrous because it worshipped the Messiah, Jesus. They saw it as an abomination, as a false religion. I mean, that's what they said. So that this is kind of wishful thinking, really, on his part.
Yeah. And what's interesting here, again, is this kind of conflict between trying to have this Hebrew biblical history recreated, while at the same time holding to some prejudices against the Jews, and trying to kind of reconcile these two. So how do we do that? Well, let's hope that they can actually go back to Palestine, take control of it, but at the same time, they can't really stay the Jews that we know them. We don't like them the way they are. Let them change. Their character has to change, and their beliefs, of course. That would be a really good dream, isn't it? He's a founding father. He's a brilliant, isn't he? I mean, he found a nation. Come on, can't he do that? He can't, certainly. But then John Adams wasn't the only Zionist. I think this is the oldest reference I could find. Maybe others might be able to find something. But because we're talking founding fathers and presidents, and I would like now to give some quotes from other presidents. Since we're into it, we might as well, just to confirm, because we don't want to leave anybody out. They would think that, you know, we let them down. We're going to mention them all, or some of them at least. So here a list of Zionist presidents. So this is Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln's 1863, halfway through his presidency, and he said, he was responding, I think, at the time to a Zionist, and he said, restoring the Jews to their national home in Palestine is a noble dream and one shared by many Americans. And then we have Theodore Roosevelt. I think, I'm not sure the date exactly, but I think in around 1918 or so, because he died early 1919. And he's talking about the end of the, I think, or towards the end of the First World War. And he says, Palestine must be made a Jewish state. Why would somebody sitting there, end of the world, would want that? Difficult. Okay. And then Woodrow Wilson, 1919, I'm moreover persuaded, and he's talking to the Jewish leaders in the US, and he says, I'm moreover persuaded that the allied nations, with the fullest concurrence of our own government and people, are agreed that in Palestine should be laid the foundations of a Jewish commonwealth. And then one from Harry Truman, 1945. This comes from a news conference where he says, we want to let as many of the Jews into Palestine as it is possible. Now, so as you can see, we're not talking about a one-off instance or one particular leader. This is consistently the position of America over the centuries on the creation or recreation of Israel in Palestine. The source is completely and utterly, the origin is religious. It had nothing to do with any later political benefits, as absolutely none. But it did, of course, ultimately became about other interests, of course, but not when it started. I would like to discuss a little bit a concept which I consider to be a misnomer that's used at times, and they call it Jewish supremacy. And it's a misnomer, and because, first of all, not all Jews believe that the Jews are superior. And because it's really, even those who believe in that concept are limited in terms of what they can do and in how to impact the lives of others. The issue with what led to the creation of Israel wasn't something that was triggered by what is called as Jewish supremacy. It was triggered by American supremacy. Jewish supremacy, if it exists at all, is just a tool used. But even if, and that's very important, even if the Jews did not want to go back to Palestine, the Americans would have found a way to send them back because they needed them there. Because going back there is ultimately what the ultimate confirmation of the self-image that Americans have. The other thing is, the Jews did not invite Americans to steal their self-image. The Jews did not tell Americans, come have a look at Hebrew Bible, it's really good, help us go there. And none of this happened. That was an enterprise started by Americans, completely on their own. And let's not forget, of course, while this was happening, the Jews were experiencing anti-Semitism in America. So it's not like that they had it, they were completely looked after by the Americans. The Americans were more keen on establishing Israel and creating that Hebrew biblical history again. Of course, one of the absurdities we have to mention here is this coming together of Christian Zionist and Jewish Zionist. Both of them link this re-establishment of Israel to the coming of the Messiah. The Christian Zionist talking about the return of Jesus, and then the Jewish, obviously, Zionist talking about the coming of the Messiah. Just this unholy alliance of absurd alliance. Both of them have the same kind of target in terms of protecting and establishing Israel, but both of them are thinking completely differently. So the Jewish Messiah will come and completely refute Jesus, and the Christian believe, and the Christian think, well, Jesus will come back and he will show the Jews what they think of themselves. It's just so ridiculous and absurd, but that's really, unfortunately, the alliance the world has been having to put up with. So America needs Israel to exist for its own self-image. And because of that, America, the exceptional America, exceptionalized Israel and treated it in a way no other state was treated like. I'm going to pick on 4 themes to talk about how these were, and they're all linked to Israel, Israel the state now, and how they were treated differently. And I'm going to start with Zionism. How Zionism is. Now, Zionism is the concept that there's a group of people, a nation, people who lived 2,000 years ago, whatever, on a particular piece of land, and they should be helped to go back there. This concept has no parallel in history. Never had, will never have. It's a mad concept. If it were to be used anywhere else, it would create complete havoc, and nobody would understand the thinking. The only reason it was taken seriously because America wanted it for its own need. Now, I'm going to show another slide here about Zionism. The United Nations General Assembly issued a resolution number 3379 in 1975, in which it declared that Zionism is a form of racism and racial discrimination.
I didn't know. I hadn't come across this before. It's interesting.
Yeah. So that's not me making it up, by the way. Anybody can go and check that this is actually. Yeah, cool. And that was in 1975. And let me show you how this was voted in. 72 countries voted in favor of it, 35 abstained, and 32 were against it. So even if those who abstained had voted against, it would have still passed because it's more than half. And that's the United Nations, remember, General Assembly. For those who don't know, America does not have a veto right there. So it could not have stopped this resolution from being adopted. That was in 1975. But here is the important and really, really kind of instructive thing. This is what happened in 1991. the Bush administration in December applied pressure on various nations to have this particular resolution revoked. And it was revoked 16 years later. Now, you will notice there is a difference in the total number of countries, because in the meantime, new countries joined the UN, which is why there are more countries in here. But look at what happened to the majorities in both cases.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have 111. So 72 voted in favor, and this has gone down to 25. 2/3 of those who voted in favor in 1975 disappeared, probably moved to the other side, and they are now against. Now, here's the question. So Zionism was defined as a form of racism and racial discrimination in 75. What changed in 16 years? One thing changed. America became the only superpower. Right. And that meant George W. Bush could apply all kinds of pressure on other countries and on the UN itself to change things the way you look at them. This is mad. And the reason I actually created this slide to show how it looked first, and then to put next to it what happened later, just to show the falsehood we live and how reality can be just changed and manipulated. And Zionism is a form of racism and racial discrimination, according to the majority of the world. And only because America decided it wouldn't have even a General Assembly resolution, it applied the pressure. The Soviet Union had collapsed by then. There's no balance of power, and they got away with what you see.
That was held. They held that vote again today, or in a few weeks in 2024. What the results would be, and of course I can't know, but I would speculate that it would be much more like 1975 than 1991. In fact, I would say it would be much higher percentage of in favors now, and maybe only a handful that would be against. That would be my speculation.
Yeah, well, I guess it would depend also ultimately, Paul, on those leaders of those various countries and how they respond to pressure. Because America now can pull the plug on anybody. They control the economy, they control all kinds. But obviously we know how people think. And when we say people, we don't talk about people there, people in the West, what they've seen and what they know. So if we had real democracies, and these democracies represent the majority opinion, we know what this graph would look like. But you know where we are, where we are. And what's interesting here is that there's a parallel here in that when the Soviet Union collapsed, and then suddenly you have America having the world for itself, the same happened after the American Revolution, when because what happened until then, the native inhabitants of America used to play the French and the Brits against each other, and they were actually protected. There were treaties that gave them land, so the settlers could not extend beyond. When the revolution took place, independence happened, and the Treaty of Paris was signed afterwards in 1683. There was nothing stopping the settlers from extending. So it was a disaster. The revolution was a disaster for the native inhabitants of America. The same happened to people here in Palestine in this particular case. And the point here to say is that Zionism could not have become a reality on the ground had America not exceptionalized it and treated it very different from anything else. Right. I'm not aware of any other concept or form of racism and discrimination that was revisited by the UN to declassify it and normalize it. I'm not aware of any, but that's what happened. Let's move to another form of exceptionalization, which is the exceptionalization of anti-Semitism. Now, anti-Semitism is a form of racism. Any form of racism is detestable, should be rejected, criticized. It's abhorrent. And it's only right to call it out. But it's in the same way it's right to call it out, it's completely wrong to exceptionalize it. Any form of racism is harmful and harmful to everybody. If I make just a quick comparison, Islamophobia is a form of racism, and a lot of people suffer from it. Of course, in terms of sheer numbers, more people suffer from Islamophobia, suffer victimized by Islamophobia than anti-Semitism, just because of the number of Muslims, number of Jews. Mm-hmm. In fact, there are huge and whole communities in the world that are being victimized because they are Muslims. And we know of Rohingya, we know of Muslims in China, India, other places. So the point here is that any form of racism, I'm not in favor of exceptionalizing any one form of racism. They all should be objected to, banned, treated equally, because they are just harmful ideologies, and they should not be treated differently, because when they're treated differently, we are indirectly allowing and tolerating the other form of racism that is not taken as seriously. Mm-hmm. That's what's been happening here. And what's interesting, just to mention a couple of historical facts about anti-Semitism. This term was coined in 1860 by an Austrian Jewish scholar, Stein, I think his name is, I've got it here, Moritz Steinschneider. And obviously he used it to refer to the discrimination against the Jews. I have no idea why he came up with this particular term, anti-Semitism. And of course, it was then picked up, reused in about 20 years afterwards by somebody called Wilhelm Marr, who's a German agitator and published, somebody who was obviously anti-Semitic himself, and they used it in a derogatory way, etc., against the Jews in 1819 in the pamphlet he published then. But it was originally coined actually by a Jewish person. And what's interesting is that, as a historical fact, is that it's derived, of course, of the name Shem, which is the oldest son of Noah. So it is very different. So Arabs, who obviously, like myself, who are descended from Ishmael, then ultimately also are Semite. We are all Semites. But if somebody discriminates against me as a Semite, that discrimination is not called anti-Semitism. I have no idea. I'm a Semite, but I don't know why that is the case. I'm just sharing a simple piece of information. I don't think anybody actually can explain how we came to this situation where anti-Semitism is. I don't know whether, Paul, you have anything to say about that. I don't know. Actually, I don't understand it.
No, the whole thing is extremely controversial. In my view, is certainly in Western Europe, the term anti-Semitism now is basically employed to criticize anyone who criticizes the state of Israel in the Middle East, their policies, their actions. And so it's used as a way of silencing Palestinian protest. And when you, I've noticed recently when the media is saying, you know, there'd be a huge spike of anti-Semitic attacks in Britain, and they never go into any detail about what that means. And I'm very suspicious that this is simply a huge increase in pro-Palestinian views being voiced, which are by definition, according to this new understanding of the concept or the term anti-Semitism, is anti-Semitic. And I think this is, so it actually completely discredits the term, because if I support the Palestinian existence and right to survive and so on, that will be labeled as anti-Semitic. So I'm a horrible anti-Jewish. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's an absurd travesty. So the term has been completely destroyed, unfortunately, by the very people who want to protect Jews against prejudice. Yeah. And it's a very ugly and frankly bizarre situation we find ourselves in, that the term has been completely evacuated of any serious meaning in the correct sense of people who are anti a race or religious group for irrational reasons, for phobic reasons. That's not the case anymore.
No.
We've all been accused of anti-Semitism for simply supporting justice of Palestinians. How absurd is that? So the term has been weaponized by Zionists to basically demonize criticism of Israel. So the term is completely discredited in my view. But in the media, it's still the weapon of choice, and it's locked down now as completely untouchable. You can't criticize this concept anymore, and that creates a terrible conflict within society, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, historically speaking, it's really wrong. Anti-Semitism is wrong on so many ways. First of all, it's wrong because it's a form of racism, as in against a particular group of people. So it's wrong. It's wrong because also it treats the Jews as if they are a race. And obviously it's a faith, it's a religion, it's not a race. And also it's wrong historically because it kind of hijacks the name Shem and applies it to only one descendant of him. Yeah. So all in all, it's really wrong. And but it has been exceptionalized as well, as I mentioned. And this is again American exceptionalism being applied there. Without the US, that would not have happened. Moving on to another equally kind of very close subject, and again, comes up always every time the name Israel is mentioned, which is the Holocaust. And of course, it's a terrible episode in human history that millions of the Jews had to suffer the Holocaust. And it's rightly used to remind people of what human beings can do to fellow human beings under all kinds of pretexts. But it's completely wrong to abuse it to justify Zionism and to actually for political reasons, such as defending the occupation of Palestine. The Holocaust and its victims have nothing to do with that. In fact, probably you're aware of this, Paul, many victims of the Holocaust whose parents actually perished in the Holocaust came out against what goes on in Palestine. And again, some of them actually against the concept of Zionism itself. Yet, the moment you talk about it, the connection is established as if because the Holocaust took place, then we can do whatever under that pretext, take over Palestine, treat the Palestinians the way the Israelis want because of the Holocaust. A lot of these people had actually not, well, they have some connection with the Holocaust, but not direct connection. The only connection to genocide they have is the connection they have to the genocide in Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is. And the other side of the issue of the Holocaust here is the exceptionalizing of the Holocaust in terms of how it is treated as a unique, special genocide. Mm-hmm. Every genocide is genocide. Every life is worth exactly any other life. There are lots of countries now where laws have been introduced against those who deny the Holocaust. As a historian, I think it's insane to deny the Holocaust. But
I think a lot of these so-called alleged Holocaust deniers are not really Holocaust deniers in the sense of denying the Holocaust. Paradoxically, you think that's what they were believing. To even question, say, the figure of 6 million Jews dying in the Holocaust, say you believe on your assessment of the evidence it was 5 million Jews. That's Holocaust denial. I mean, it really is. If you question anything of the narrative at all, the magnitude of it, for example, you are denying the Holocaust. So it's a very blunt weapon that basically protects any critical evaluation or any difference of opinion, actually.
Some countries, Paul, some countries use in their law, deny or minimize to cover the situations you're talking about. Right. Now, you can't say anything. Effectively, if you do
minimize is a very subjective. What do you mean? What does one mean by minimize? I mean, you know, how long is a piece of string? But I've noticed this when you actually drill down into accusations of Holocaust denial. There are some well-known certain historians who've done this. When you actually drill down, there's a British historian, famously, I forget his name. He's an expert on German history. He's still alive. I don't know.
Is it David? I might have come across his name.
I can't remember his name, but anyway, he
was imprisoned in Austria.
Yes, him. Yes,
I can't remember his
name. He's regularly accused and has been accused by courts of Holocaust denial. But actually, if you drill down into what he's actually said, and you can hear him on YouTube, I mean, he's not hiding his views. He doesn't deny the Holocaust, but he denies aspect. He might deny about the functionality of Auschwitz, for example, or he'll quibble over important things, but he does state that actually that the Nazis did gas Jews, and so he's not denying it. But for him, he's been labelled this, but it's very inaccurate because it's not what he's not saying. The Holocaust didn't happen, and he's come under criticism from actual Nazis for saying that because they don't believe it happened at all. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, I don't know the details of what he said, but you're right. I would not be surprised that a lot of these supposedly deniers, what they do, probably they question certain aspects, but they don't deny what happened as such. And there are no other, I mean, obviously some of these laws that cover the Holocaust are general laws. So they are not really
David Irving. So I'm talking about David Irving. Sorry,
Irving. Yeah, that's
he's a British. He's he's written some amazing, the highly regarded books, or were regarded highly regarded books on Germany. But he's accused of being a Holocaust denier, but he actually technically he isn't. If you actually listen to what he says himself, which you can do, but you really have to dig hard to find it there because his stuff is widely banned online. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, that's all right. And so some of these kind of legislations are general. So they're not specifically about the Holocaust, but they usually apply, they are rarely applied to any other genocide. I haven't heard anybody being imprisoned for saying that the French did not kill 1 million Algerians. And if anybody says that, they are absolutely fine. If you find genocide documented on YouTube and on social media, and credit to Israel, they have provided us with a lot of documentation, and a lot of people deny that. They see it, they deny it, they're absolutely fine. There's nothing they should fear. But if somebody says something, as you say, not even denying the Holocaust, then they could be actually prosecuted and put in jail. That is a form of exceptionalization that also comes from America. Without America, and exceptional America, that would not have happened. And of course, ultimately, this leads me to the exceptionalization of Israel itself. You mentioned earlier that if you criticize Israel, I think there are certain countries where they're trying to introduce laws whereby if you criticize Israel, you're actually labeled as anti-Semitic, or you're actually breaking the law. It's mad. I mean, this is happening in France, at least I know. France, the secular country, for whatever reason, when it comes to Israel, it's not the secular country we know. Yeah. Israel protecting, actually, just remember, we're not talking about somebody going there to fight against Israel, because, by the way, a lot of people go from the West to fight with Israel against the Palestinians. That's absolutely fine. Don't worry about that. And we're not talking about any violence, any form, just people criticizing Israel. They're being threatened, I think, with if the bill passes, with imprisonment or 20,000 euros fine or something along these lines. Whether it's going to become a law or not, the fact that it's being considered is significant. Now, I haven't heard anybody saying, well, if you criticize Saudi Arabia, you're Islamophobic, or we're going to put you in a prison. If anything, you're likely actually to get a lot of visits on your website, and you'll be invited on all kinds of shows because you are criticizing Saudi Arabia. They have no democracy. We have the democracy. We know what kind of democracy. And so here you have it. Israel is as exceptionalized as the Holocaust, as anti-Semitism. as Zionism. And this brings me really to conclude what I had to say. And just to recap, Israel looks powerful and a competent, capable country. It is not. Israel is a facade. When we talk about Israel, it's right to mention Israel because it's the direct aggressor, the state, the nation that's committing the genocide, the mass killing, all of the ethnic cleansing. But Israel really, really, even now, is nothing other than a tool in the hands of America. If we go back all the way to where it all started, it started with self-image, this faith in American exceptionalism that needed to be affirmed, and it had to be affirmed, and to be affirmed, Israel had to be established and to be defended. As we speak now, weapons are being shipped from America from the US to Israel to kill civilians. There's no other way of putting it, just to kill civilians. We know that, they know that. So Israel, despite its might, military might, and it's really powerful, it's nothing. Its existence is because of America. Israel needs America to exist, and America needs Israel to exist. The two of them for different reasons. Israel is not a fulfillment of the Bible, a biblical prophecy. Israel is the fulfillment of America's self-image, its belief, it's in exceptionalism. It's been the new Israel, the new chosen of God. American exceptionalism, chosenness, etc., is really, America is exceptional, but it's exceptional in the sense that it's an exceptional danger. I don't think the world has ever seen the likes of. If we measure it in terms of victims, capabilities, and going forward, and the duration over which it sustained itself, it is exceptional, but in terms of danger.
Yeah, well, extraordinary. Thank you so much indeed for that extremely insightful and educational context that we really need to understand what's going on and with American exceptionalism, and extremely interesting indeed. And I really appreciate the way you root your comments and observations in verifiable, checkable sources. It's not, you're not just giving speculation, you're rooting it in quotes and texts that we can reference and check for ourselves. So thank you very much indeed, and inshallah we will see you next time. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.